So you've gone through the motions. You're ready to be assessed. You're going to have an assessor look at your world. Have you ever wondered what they think and how they see you? Stay tuned and we'll talk about it today.
Dom Kirby, Matt Lee. The game.
What's up, everyone? Happy Wednesday. Welcome to the game on PackSite Live, so where we talk about all the cybersecurity shenanigans you need to know about. We're going to de-nerdify a little bit this week because we want to talk about assessments and what it looks like to be assessed. But I think most importantly, what the assessors think about what they're seeing when you're working with them on your assessment. So that's what we're going to cover today. Don't forget to like, share, subscribe, all that fun stuff. Y'all, Beyond is filling up and it's coming up quick. Just want you to know that if you're interested in Beyond, that early bird pricing is about to expire, and the numbers I see in terms of available tickets to Beyond keeps getting smaller. So just so you know, if you're interested, definitely go take care of that. Interact with us in the chat, all that jazz. But let's bring everyone in and get right to the meat of the show because we've got a lot to cover.
All right.
What's happening?
Did we build y'all up enough, Wayne and Chris, on this one?
I'm a little worried. Right?
But seriously, real quick for me, and anybody who doesn't know, what is Trustmark? What is GTIA's Trustmark, Wayne or Chris?
Go ahead, CJ.
Let's see. GTIA Cybersecurity Trustmark is a collection of controls and safeguards that were put together specifically for the solution providers.
And Wayne, you're assessing those, and how many have you guys done now? It's quite a few that were already pushed through at this point.
Well, in full transparency, I only did the first 13 so that we could figure out what the minimum standard would be using real world, right? I wanted to kind of have a look before we pass the torch over to the third party accredited assessor, which they're doing. I think they're up to 11.
12.
11
or 12.
So
yeah.
I did, right. I did the first 13. I'm still finishing up a couple, just a couple. And then they've already completed 2. Here's the interesting part, Matt. I think your audience needs to know. We don't want to slow down the business, right? So this isn't like a traditional assessment. If you've been through SOC 2 or an ISO 27000 or 800-171 prior to CMMC or sometimes 853, but we do things a little bit differently because we're talking about small businesses here in most cases.
Yeah.
And we do have some folks that are very small, like less than five person shops going through, and they're trying to still make a living, yet improve their cyber hygiene so that they can say that we are doing something, we are improving, and we are maturing our organization and creating a plan. So I think that's really a lot of the assessor side too, right? Is making sure that, because I had to stop myself a couple of times, and Matt and I could probably have a whole show on, we need to assess them over here. No, that's too much.
Meet them where they are. Meet them where they are.
They're not gonna make it, right? We need to slowly raise the bar because there's so many different types of solution providers out there today of different levels of maturity and understanding. And so if we're trying to create a standard, which we are, let's just be honest, we call them industry accepted best practices today inside of the Trustmark, but eventually the goal is to have this become the standard around the globe for solution providers, right?
Sure.
But to do that, we need to slowly increase the bar. And we modeled a lot of what we did for the program off the way the payment card industry started with the data security standard. right? They used language like should, right?
Sure.
In some of the stuff because they needed to gather adoption of these best practices that they were trying to
And
help move. So, so imagine
if I
then,
can
right, where we are, right?
if I can summate kind of where we're at on that, it's different because you're not forcing them to sit down at a table. Dom, you've been through this. Pull all your resources,
Yep.
gather your evidence right now. If you don't finish them this week, we're done with our engagement. We have to get, so you stop business. And in a small MSP with 4 people, that means telling 12 clients you're not going to help them this week. And so what you've had to do is both
Right.
adjust to letting more time pass, be more accommodating to the time difference and the engagement difference of the MSP, but at the same time balancing the stuff they're putting out. We can't hold them to the standard we want them to be at 5 iterations from now. We have to help them see
Right.
where their journey is down that status. Is that a good status
That,
set for where this
yes,
assessment is as a
that,
response?
that sums it up perfectly, honestly, right? Because in order to get them to move the needle, right? That's all we're asking is let's just take a long stride. I don't want you to have to take a massive leap forward. We'll crush the businesses.
Yep.
And that's not the
Agreed.
objective here, right?
It's to raise the tide.
And that's also part of the reason why it's not a pass fail. So a couple of
Sure.
understanding some of the logistics behind the scenes. It's a meet, does not meet, partial meets. Oh, and I've had some people really try to push the envelope on not applicable. But you know,
Don't even get me started.
but in all fairness, I'm not saying that things are not applicable, but you have to really justify why something is not applicable inside of your organization. And we need to have a conversation around that because, we were talking earlier in the green room, Matt, the 4 of us, and it's making sure that they understand what's involved in the impact for not having that safeguard in play, right?
Yeah.
And if
A
they
risk
can
decision, you might
honestly,
say.
right, it is. All of this stuff comes back to business risk, and so that's really the approach. And I think so EJ and I are on, and we'll hear commentary, I'm sure, from Matt and Dom. But we really wanted to talk about what are some of the things that on the 13 and even some of the 12, because CJ and I have sat in with the third-party accredited assessor on some of those. What are we seeing that we would like MSPs that maybe haven't started? Give them an opportunity to say, wow, this is something we're not doing. Here's why we should be doing it. And then maybe figure out a good way of putting some of these safeguards that we're going to talk about inside of your own organization, even before you start the Trustmark, right? Now,
Well, let's bring them
we're
up.
not going
I
through,
think you've got some
we're
slides.
not going through 177.
Yeah.
Thank God. Because that's just a lot, right? But let's start with the most important, and I'll talk about why it's the most important in just a second. If we could go to the next slide, but it's really about policy. Or hold on, let's caveat this entire thing, because one of the things we hear all the time from folks is, well, how do I know if I'm ready? Right? How do I know if I'm ready to go through the Trustmark? Or how do I know if I'm even ready for a SOC 2 or CMMC or ISO 27000? Pick your framework. What you have to remember is that perfection is the enemy of progress. You are not going to be perfect. I know that probably just blew some people's minds, but you're not going to be perfect when you start and when you come out of this. There's always going to be a gap. There may be multiple gaps that you're going to have to pay attention to. But just remember the other famous Winston Churchill quote that I have here in the box: success is not final, failure is not fatal, and it's the courage to continue that counts. So that is the most important thing you need to focus on as a solution provider here.
I'm going to
Go
stretch
ahead.
you on this one. Wayne and Chris, how do you
Go.
see this? How does this manifest? Where do you see perfection being the enemy of progress when you go to do an assessment? Let's try to bring it down to that tactical. What do you see?
I would start with
Go ahead.
the perfect part is more of like a completeness part, not perfect. They think that they're done because they've
Sure.
ticked box, they've got evidence, they've got answers, good, bad, or otherwise. It's like I filled it all in, so now give me a grade. I didn't
Yeah.
study for the test, but
Right.
I'm pretty good at what I do, so give me a good grade. I think that's been the number one conversation that I have had in MSP saying, "Hey, I just want a reality check. Am I ready?" And you start having the conversation, and in some areas they aren't ready. They haven't done enough from a maturity standpoint, but that shouldn't dictate whether or not they go through with having an assessment.
So
However, we're seeing is like you should have some of this, answered, right? It doesn't have to be complete.
So do they answer it in
Right.
ways where it's blank then by that statement of they just don't have an answer? Or you say they write like a perfect state down even though they're not there? Like help me understand where that failure manifests, Wayne or
Yeah,
Chris?
that's a good way to ask it. So, like for example, they think that because they have evidence that or whatever it is, that means that they've given you a complete answer, even though the
Gotcha.
evidence
Right.
might not be contextually right for the answer that they've given.
Okay.
Right. Or,
That's
hey,
actionable.
I have a policy. I have a policy, but it may not contain some of the minimum key elements that need to be in that policy. Right. Or another good example, and again, this is more of a maturity thing, is, and I've seen this before too, and I'll bring this. I won't talk about this one during the tail one, but having an acceptable use policy that outlines the minimum password length requirement, right? We don't have to debate passwords on the show,
Sure.
but having a minimum password length requirement of 8 in the acceptable use, but in the access management policy, they have a minimum password length of 14 characters, right?
Okay.
So, meaning from
That's
an assessor
incongruity.
perspective,
Right.
well,
Yeah.
there's there. I don't want to say folks are just creating stuff to check a box because I don't think that's necessarily true. I think in some cases it's probably true, but in the majority of cases, they're probably forgetting about what's in that policy, right?
Okay.
As opposed to what's in a separate policy, and they're not aligned correctly.
So
Does
Chris
that
and I
make sense?
tackled this today. It does. And Chris and I tackled this because I
We
wanted to bring
did.
it back to perfection as the enemy of good. Of the statement of Chris and I said, you're going to put in the in the policy that you're going to do 27 character passwords, but then there's no evidence to support it. That piece of it too, and also it doesn't give you a history of showing the improvement over time. You say where you're going to be that you can't provide evidence for, right? And instead of saying here's where I am and here's the gaps that I do have, and we know, and that goes on a poem and becomes something to move forward to some extent. Wayne, is that maybe something?
No, that's absolutely right. And that's what I was going to say. The other side to this of the perfection piece and why folks need to stop worrying about being perfect, because one, they never will. Why they need to
Sure.
focus on progress is that it's all related to your plan of how you're going to get there and achieve success in closing the gap. That is the most important thing, right? And you want to have a well thought out plan, which, because to your point, Matt, what you just said is that it shows maturity, it shows progress, it shows a level of understanding, and it also shows a level of commitment on
Yep.
behalf of the organization that we are we know we have something that we have to improve upon and we have to mature over time. So that's
All right,
when I
Dom.
put that down. Yeah, there were two sides to that perfection. Don't let perfection get in the way of progress, right?
Is
One from
don't. Yeah, go. Sum it up.
the start, right? Don't start with perfection in mind. Just start. But when you get right, but when you get going through this process, make sure that when you identified the gaps, you're working to solve for them. Because here's, in a way, in a manner that is acceptable for the business entity, and that's going to bleed into my next one with respect to policy. But the point here is you want to make sure that you're moving the organization and treating it like, in some cases you could be nimble and quick, in others it's going to take time.
And be honest
Right?
about it.
The
And
average time for folks to come into the readiness path and actually start going through it, the get ready for the assessment, is between 12 and 18 months.
I
Most
know
of
a
them
guy that
hit,
said that. I remember a guy saying that about 12 to 18 months ago as a prediction. I don't want to say who it was. That would be silly,
Yeah.
but somebody. I digress.
Most come in right around the 14-month mark.
Makes sense.
So on average, it's 12 to 18 months, but right around the 14-month mark is when folks are typically ready to start on the assessment. And
Would you say that's a fair basis for people, and just say that if you're around 12 months into this journey, go get it checked with go down that path? Is that a fair way to say at least a time limit, maybe?
Yes, and you know,
at least check in.
The other, check in, have somebody, you know, we review stuff for folks all the time. I just did it for an entity that the third party assessor was getting ready to start on, and they were like, well, can we have somebody review our stuff first and tell us where some of our gaps are? Right. And so I went through all 177 safeguards. I wrote down some questions, some comments, and some other stuff for them just to get them thinking about what they should be doing with respect to that, right? So this isn't, you're not going to lose anything by going through this process. If anything, you're going to gain a better understanding. And that's one of the fun parts. And I do mean fun with FUN, right? I'm not joking about that. CJ and I love helping folks understand and succeed. And I
think it's really important to point out, Wayne, that I'm thinking of the MSP you're referring to. Some of what you just said, these are the more mature MSPs that are asking for a genuine look at, you know, does it stink or does it smell okay, right? And the ones that are less mature have been quick to say, I'm ready, I'm good to go, I'm really, you know, we're ready to move forward with this program. And you're like, no, you're not.
Right.
But getting that feedback gets you there. What's the next slide there, Wayne? Let's keep us moving on this one. What's the next thing you see?
Yeah. So let's talk about the first tail, right? And this is the important one, because this is one of the things that I've seen consistently inside of the MSP set that we've assessed. Some have policies. Those that have policies, they're not necessarily standardized in a particular format, right? Sure. So the lesson here for policies, every organization needs policies today, and this is the big why for that. I don't want folks to think about policies being strictly created by people for people. I want you to think of policies, and this even hits to the business owners, and I know if there's any comments in the chat, Dom, let me know. But policies are written by the business entity itself. Policies are not written by the CISO, the owner, the board of directors, take your pick. It's the business creating guardrails, hence the photo, of how all employees will operate inside of this entity. And that's something I think is a huge perspective shift in a lot of cases for solution providers, right? Because ultimately it doesn't matter if it's the business entity, it doesn't matter how many employees you have, right? I don't care if you're a solopreneur. The business wants the business to run a certain way, and it has to put up guardrails to protect itself, because ultimately policies should be aligned to your business risk, which are aligned to your business objectives. And I think we've talked about that on a previous show.
You just defined governance, Wayne. You literally just defined governance. The 100%. Fact that the business itself must write and dictate policy, and the adherence to it is a business objective and outcome and risk. Brilliant. Correct. Just all right. Yes. Just wanted to say that.
And so that doesn't mean you need 35 policies, right? The business entity needs to create policies as it grows and develops. So if you do have employees, obviously you're going to need to have an acceptable use policy, right? Yep. What you can do, what you can't do, how you are going to create a secure baseline for your network devices, for your endpoint devices, for your servers themselves, right? CJ, what was access management? I guess was one of the other ones we had talked about, right?
Yep. Secure
What's in
baseline
an access management?
configuration, which because
Mhm.
yes, correct. And then I think the other one was now you're putting me on. Roles and responsibilities.
Roles,
Yep, yep,
responsibilities,
Ooh,
backup and
Racy, that's a
recovery,
fun one.
yeah.
Yeah.
right? We
Wayne, can
need
you
a
make
backup and
some
recovery policy as well.
maybe you
Good.
can make some sense of this? We sometimes in English, I know this is like crazy, use one word to mean a couple of things. And I think policy gets confused as one of those, right? Because there's the policies that an employee signs or needs to read or needs to be a part of in every context. And then there are policies that set the guardrails for other things that get used in different contexts, like when building information systems or when doing, right? And so people often converge those two as, you mean I got to get my employees to sign 96 different documents for all these different policies? Can you help shed some light on that difference in the little p policy and then the big P policy, potentially, is the way I try to say it?
So in most cases, what I believe Matt's referring to is that policies govern, again, everything inside of your organization from a business entity perspective, right? So whether it's your people, your process, or your tech, that those policies are written directly for and by the business entity to protect itself, because those are the three biggest risks inside. Two really big risks there, but three risks overall for the business entity to have a terrible, horrible, bad day, right? The other policy are, I mean, we could, this is where it sometimes kind of blends, right, Matt, is the acceptable use policy ends up pulling in bits and pieces of policy statements from other folks, which is why you don't want to duplicate policy statements
Yes.
that are specific for your people. There's specific policy for your tech. There's specific policies for how you're going to do things, right? So don't lose sight of that and try not to boil the ocean. That's really the lesson from the tail here is make sure that you have enough policy inside of your environment to be able to start developing your foundational security program. Because all of your policies should have measurable statements to ensure compliance. If you don't have measurable statements, then you still have confusion and you're still going to have chaos inside of your organization. The business has no way, and again, I'm referring to the business entity, has no way to know whether or not it's properly managing passwords, as an example.
Yeah. Yep.
Or that,
So
right? And
to take
so,
a stab,
go ahead.
at the challenge of this one is people have policies, right, that they've written to do something, they're not doing them, which indicates no governance, right? There's no measurable statements, to your point of saying, I can't say passwords should be of this length and will be these. You don't have any measurable statements in those things. So those some of the failures you're seeing around policy is either too aspirational, they're not doing it, evidence doesn't support it, right? Or there is no policy at all and you just say this is what we're doing, and that being an aspect of that, correct?
There's
That's
one more,
correct,
and that's the
right?
book. When they write a book and they say, "Here's my policy for that," and you're like, "That's 74 pages." Like,
Right.
it has to be
The
consumable within reason.
Yes, you have to make sure that it's clear and understood by every employee, including the newest employee inside of the organization, who may or may not be a technologist, right?
At least the
And that's
people
an
part
art,
that
Could be a
right?
touches
Like
them.
that,
Yeah, go Dom.
Yeah, that applies to.
that it's hard to do, right? Like if you think about HR needs to be able to drive an employee handbook within which is going to be a set of policies. Then, and I co-authored a large policy change for PAX 8 last year, and it got deeply technical because it had a lot of technical aspects to it. But then how do you frame this so it's not a book, like you said, Chris and Wayne, so that people can understand it, so that when they sign it or agree to it, they can actually do the thing we're asking them to do. And there's such a fine balance between making sure you're accomplishing what you want and making sure other people can accomplish what you want.
And that's part of the reason why I think a lot of the smaller organizations don't create policy. But the thing I will say about that is I don't care if you're a one person shop. If you have the potential or want for growth, you're going to start adding employees. You're going to start
Right.
growing that business. 5 years from now, you're going to have an HR and a finance department. And if you're thinking that you're going to be able to now start documenting policy in place today, you are sadly mistaken. It's going to be a lot more difficult to put policy in place for the business entity once the business entity has grown. It's going to become a blob, and you're going to lose control.
And it always goes that way. But it is much harder, right? Like it does seem to always go that way. The takeaway on this one is get policy in place. Don't overthink policy. Bringing back to the original, don't let perfection be the enemy of good, right? Like at least get it out there, show that you're taking a stab at it, show that you have governance and rails in place. And don't forget to separate, to Dom's point, policy from procedure. It's perfectly acceptable sometimes to have reference objects that are much more technical, much more procedure centric, that then support that policy and have that lineage. And that goes back to what you started with, Wayne, is they're all in different formats. They're all in different ways they're written and how they're tied together, and some loosely, some in an SSP, right? If they came from the 800.171 world, they're going to be more of a system security plan. All right, I think we have time to get through one more, Wayne. What's the next big tale from the assessment?
Probably the policy is just, policy is just one of those things. So this was always a fun one, right? Not applicable. We're 100%.
This is probably my favorite.
All right, I got 2 minutes. I've got 2 minutes. So
go.
Right. So here's the thing. All of the safeguards that we have, I say we collectively is the entire membership that helped put together the safeguards, right? This wasn't a Wayne and Chris show. The members actually helped pull together the actual safeguards and what the minimums are here. You'll be hard pressed to find anything in there that is still not applicable to the cloud environment space, right? I would, CJ, keep me honest, but I would say between 40 and 60% of the safeguards that are in there are all around your people and your process. And
at least.
And the other, and the other stuff is really around the technology. But you know what? You still need a firewall in cloud. You still need to make sure that the data is being protected, whatever data is being stored, processed, or transmitted through the cloud space. And that, honestly, that's where a lot of people lose sight of the fact that they have a lot of risk in the cloud that they themselves cannot manage, but they really do still own the risk, right?
Without going off on a limb, this is somewhat of a gap of the controls themselves today. And I don't mean that just to point a finger at Trustmark. I mean the underlying CIS controls have a very, I live in a walled garden, I have a castle and moat, I live on my purse. Like, they don't really represent the future today. And I think maybe the thing that you're saying quite presciently is, if the data flows there, it applies. And in this case, if it flows there and you've said you're going to put a firewall that allows you to stop a threat actor from injecting something that I can use to make my demise happen, then that means where that data went, you've got to figure out how you're going to apply that. In fact, that's what I would judge people the most on, Wayne, is the lack of understanding of the core functions by proxy of the statement you just put up on the screen, right? By saying, it doesn't apply to me there. It's still your data. Yes, there's a shared responsibility matrix or lack thereof, but everything on your half of the SRM, you still have to do. And I think that's something that probably is the gap here, is this understanding that you can't just hand off everything. It's still your risk.
It's the spirit of the control.
That's what I was going to say. It is your risk, right? And so if you are using a cloud environment today that is risky to more risk than the business entity wants or can handle, then you need to find another alternative, because you got yourself into a pickle and it's going to come back to bite you. Especially if you cannot properly secure it, because your clients are going to ask you to secure it, right? They expect you to be doing a lot of the things that we probably aren't doing today, I would reckon to guess.
Everybody's got shared responsibility matrices.
We definitely are. Yeah. Only 41% of intra identities sign on with MFA. Like, we're not there. Let's be clear, we're not there. Like,
right.
Yeah.
Yes.
All right. And I would add that. And Wayne, I would add that you are right, because I was on a webinar with John Harden yesterday, and he was showing me that the number 17 app across their entire monitored field was DeepSeek, right? And the number 14 behind that was, I think, ChatGPT. And the reason I bring it up is you cannot tell me that you have not told yourself, oh, that doesn't apply to me for Control 2 because it's not installed software. If that is the case, or you can't tell me that you have a policy in place that you went through and said, yes, everybody, you're good. We've got our way. We're going to engage AI, and this meets the needs. It meets our business needs and our risk posture. So the data is just staggering at how fast these get adopted and how much it really shows that people don't understand the controls. And it also means, Wayne, why you as an assessor or guiding the assessors, and my role in doing some of the follow-up and some of the work there, is to try to meet people where they are, educate, ask them to be better, and drive them to be forward as they continue, while also setting a minimum standard. We know we're all in the same boat because John Harden's data is only the measuring ones that are actually measuring SaaS consumption, which means they're the ones that should be the best of the best, and they're consuming in that way. So, anyways, I'll get off my tangent here, but.
And anyway, so there's more, right? I mean, obviously, CJ and I could probably do a whole hour podcast on this. Just other things that we've seen that folks really do need to pay attention to: data flow diagrams, network diagrams, sensitive information and where it exists inside of their organization, asset inventory. I mean, there's just I could get mad on a tangent and
There's
say,
like
what is an asset?
170 something of them we could talk about there, especially with what is
one
an
of the most
asset.
Yeah, I know, right?
Points we brought up today though was a lot of the solution providers that are going through this are in that 14-month average of preparing for it, right? Of that readiness and that working through and that building that maturity. This is not something you just like, oh, this looks nice, I'm gonna sign up for it and we're gonna get it done. That's not a thing, and nor is SOC, nor is ISO, or any of those programs. They're all things you have to build maturity and be prepared for, as they should be, right? If it was something you could sign up and do a survey and get, it wouldn't mean anything, right? There would not be an accomplishment.
And that's right. And here's the fun, again, fun part, right? You have a community here that is, through the association, that is able to help you succeed. And that I can't stress that enough, right? I mean, there are people willing to bend over and sit down, help you figure out how to satisfy a safeguard inside of your organizational structure that meets your organizational needs, by the way, right? Who else is going to do that for you? Seriously.
For that
besides
price,
Matt,
too.
when you catch him at a conference, it's pick his brain.
5 minutes. Yeah.
Anyway,
man, thank y'all, gentlemen, for being here. We got into too much chatter and not enough about all the different ones that come up, but hopefully we gave a good grounding there. So thank y'all for being here and giving the view from the lens of the assessor. We might have to do this again.
Yes.
All right.
CJ,
Wayne, thanks so much for joining us. Always great to have you two on the show. Matt, give us the play of the day.
Let's do it. All right, number one is we heard that it's 14 months on average before an MSP starts to be ready for assessment. That means that starting right this minute, if you haven't started, it is 14 months of work. And much like going to the gym, it would be silly to sign up for a membership on Jan 1. Expect to go to the gym 3 times, change nothing in your diet, find a sweet new donut store on the way past the gym, and then stop going to the gym. That is most people's story January 1st, and maybe you're one of those. That's human nature. The challenge is, how do you start where you are, continue to go through something iterative over time to gain a position of excellence? If you've ever done it anywhere, whether it's in school or whether it's in a gym or whether it's in sports or whether it's in something academic, this is one of those things takes time. I think the takeaway is there's a lot of people like Wayne and Chris and GTIA that are there to help you, guide you through it, and get you through that time to where in 24 months you'll be the expert and the hero that you want to be. Get started.
Game over.
Man, what a well-timed play of the day. Consistency, persistence, maybe perseverance. We could probably sum those up. Really, really important stuff. This is not a small program. This is a commitment, but I do think it is a commitment that is probably worth it, and something you should really take a moment to dive into at GTIA. That's our show for the week. Thanks so much for joining us. Again, like, share, subscribe, all that fun stuff. Also, we're looking for like nerdy stuff to talk about. If there's an attack method you want to see, or a tool you think we should dive into, a defensive tool is totally totally fun too. Let us know, shoot us a message on LinkedIn, comment on the video, something to that effect. Let us know so that we can build more shows for you based on what you're looking for. And with that, we'll see you next week, same place, same time.